Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're asking if it's spring in Saudi Arabia. We're talking about it with Wajia Al-Wudair, a leading women's rights advocate. She joins us from Dhahran. Saudi school teacher, English teacher rather, Naila Al-Faifi is with us as well. She is in Bahrain. And here in our studio, Stéphane Lacroix, who teaches at Paris's prestigious Sciences Po Political Science Institute, and Walid Fares of National Defense University, also an advisor to the U.S. Congress. Before the break, we were talking about the pace of reform inside the kingdom. Naila Al-Faifi, do you feel as though reform could move? Again, you mentioned earlier that we had the discussion in part one about the pace of that reform, but do you see now the pressure, what Walid Fares was talking about, the pressure from surrounding states is perhaps accelerating the pace of reform in Saudi Arabia?
To be honest, I think that neighboring states are maybe they're in worse conditions than people who are in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not. The Saudi people are not suffering as much as the others. I would not.
We seem to be losing the connection. We'll try to get back to Naila Al-Faifi in a moment. She was making the point there, Stéphane Lacroix, that in Saudi Arabia, there's not as much economic hardship as there is perhaps in surrounding states.
Well, it's true. I mean, Saudi Arabia has a much better economy than the other states. At the same time, because of oil, obviously. But at the same time, you do have unemployment in Saudi Arabia, and it's pretty high. I mean, the figures that we have are like 20 or 25% of the young people of Saudi Arabia are unemployed. Of course, they would get...
but they get a stipend if they don't...
They would get a stipend, but still, people also want to do things. They feel that, this state that's, basically buying their silence is not something that they want forever. So obviously, this works with, the more intellectual-minded youth who would organize on these things. It's true that, the regular Saudi who is not employed and gets money from the state will just stay depoliticized and be happy. But it doesn't work with everyone, and especially with this generation of young people that Mr. Fares mentioned, right? The ones who are on Facebook, the ones who connect with the world, the ones who see that things are happening elsewhere, and they don't see why it shouldn't happen to them.
Walid Fares mentioning that it's been last 5 years has been a noticeable change. Do you agree?
In Saudi Arabia, you mean? With this new generation? Yes, of course, they've been organizing very much. I mean, on Facebook, you have plenty of groups. You have plenty of mobilizations in Saudi Arabia taking place. The women issue is one, but we could mention mobilizations for political prisoners. This is something. Every week in Riyadh, people gather in front of the Ministry of Interior to ask for the release of political prisoner. The images are on YouTube, they can be seen. The Shiites are organized, they're demanding for their rights. They've been demonstrating in March and April. So you do have different movements that have been growing in the last few years indeed. For the moment, the weakness of and it's the general weakness of the Saudi opposition is that it's very divided. Because you have the liberals on the one hand, you have the Islamists on the other hand, you have the Shiites, you have the women, and everyone, in a way, is defending his issue. And they don't really converge. And the government knows very well how to play this against this, right? Play the women against the conservatives, play the conservatives against the liberals, play the conservatives against the Shiites. So it's also a game. But you do have, an opposition in Saudi Arabia. You do have people like Wajiha who speak out on different issues and not just on the women issue.
Naila Al-Faifi, I believe we have the connection restored. Apologies for the breakup there. Do you also see that again, we've talked about it a lot, with the social networking, with the fact that there are more sounding boards, that Saudi Arabia is a different place than it was 5 years ago?
Yes, I do agree, and I'd like to make one thing clear. I am not oblivious to what's going on. I do admit there is a problem. We have a problem, and I'm sure that every country has a percentage of corruption. But what I'm saying is, I think that the Saudi government is trying to work on this corruption, but given the size or the mass of whatever they're dealing with, they're trying the best they can. And I believe that I study, I'm not just an English instructor. I also study mass communication and public relations. I know for a fact that a person needs to address a problem in a strategic way, not attack or force. I believe that you can accomplish change in a very strategic and very well planned way. And I think that's what the Saudi government is trying to do. I'm against steering problems or organizing massive riots. That's not the way to get to where. And, I also encourage women instead of just petitioning or complaining I think they should work on their skills, on their training. Yes, we do have a lot of bachelor holders and graduates, but are they qualified to be put in the work industry? A certificate is not enough to be given a chance in the work field. That's what I think. And I'm sure Ms. Wajiha agrees that there are a lot of powerful Saudi women that I can name a few that have reached a point and are well known and respected for what they have accomplished. I encourage Saudi females to do the same, to focus their energy on building themselves instead of just focusing their energy on stirring problems or organizing riots. That's what I encourage. And I'm also stressing that the government is trying the best they can with what they have. Because as I previously mentioned, Saudi Arabia is a big country. You have different regions with different characteristics and different cultural backgrounds. The Saudi government is trying to make everyone gradually take a step forward and gradually progress.
I want to pick up on that point, Naila Faifi, because in this country, everybody's watching closely what's happening in Morocco, because there's a lot of Moroccans who live here in France, and there you have a kingdom which was once an absolute monarchy, where they've just instituted reforms, and everybody's wondering, can there be an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary process? What do you think when it comes to Saudi Arabia?
Well, first we're talking about Morocco. I would add Jordan. I would add even Kuwait and many other constitutional monarchies. The crossing of the Rubicon has to be a constitution. Has to be a constitution that allows the formation of political parties, which are going to sit down with the monarch and then negotiate the next stage. So this is a different planet from planet Saudi Arabia, whereby the idea of having the source of change coming in negotiations or in demonstrations. Let's suppose the political forces of change are going to sit down with the regime and say, what can we change? What's happening right now is accommodation. For some segments of society. It's not a response to a political pressure, and that political pressure is considered as legitimate, which triggers in me the notion of this could be reversed if in the halls of the power inside Saudi Arabia, because that's an absolute monarchy, there will be another monarch who will come later and would say, well, we're going to go back to the Salafi ways. So as long as there is no written document accepted by, I don't say an elected, even a co-opted representative assembly, it's going to be embellishment. It's going to be probably the early age of glasnost and perestroika in the Soviet Union, not the late one, when it started. That would be the comparison.
You mentioned the fact that there's succession. Well, that's always a question when it comes to Saudi Arabia. The king, 87 years old, reported in frail health. Crown Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the defense minister, he might be the same age, and so there are issues there. The interior minister, Prince Nayef, he weighs in a lot on foreign policy, but he's been unwell himself. And then there's the veteran foreign minister, Prince Saud Al Faisal. He's also in his 70s and also has his own health issues. Stéphane Lacroix, this is always something that gives the West the jitters, the health reports on various leaders inside the Saudi royal family.
Right. They are all old, and many of them are not in very good shape when it comes to health. King Abdullah is not in such a bad shape. He doesn't have any life-threatening disease, so he may continue to reign for quite a while.
He's 87.
He's 87, but people are tough in Saudi Arabia, so you can expect him to live for a few more years. Prince Sultan is indeed sick, and he's announced to be dead. Every 2 months you have these reports that he's dead, and then he's not. But if these reports come out all the time, it's because there's a reason for them. And Prince Nayef also is not in such a bad shape, so he could be the next king.
We hear so Walid Fares saying you need a constitution. How does it work right now? Who's got the upper hand in terms of when you look at these people who are elderly, who are the ones who are really at the core of the decision-making process? Who's making the decisions?
Right. So the Saudi royal family works as an institution. It's not an absolute monarchy. King Abdullah doesn't rule on his own. He has to consult his brothers, who all happen to be the major ministers of the state, and they get together and they take the decisions. They disagree sometimes, and there's a struggle within the family, and sometimes the stronger faction manages to push in one direction. At the moment, there are two factions within the family as we know it. King Abdullah would be on what they call the liberal side, and Prince Nayef would be on the conservative side. Liberal and conservative here are to be understood as social issues on society. Politics, everyone agrees that Saudi Arabia should not have a constitution and should remain an authoritarian regime and a monarchy as it is. But on social issues like the women issue, King Abdullah is certainly more prone to push for change. Prince Nayef is not, which is why, because Prince Nayef is in relatively good health, and when King Abdullah dies, he may be the next. On issues as the women issue, we can expect things to go backwards when Prince Nayef comes to power. But, at least for the moment, I think King Abdullah is a sincere social reformer. He's been doing this since he was in power. In 2009, he appointed a vice minister of education who was a woman. He opened a university, that's the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, which is the first university with gender mixing, which is something completely new in Saudi Arabia, where everything is supposed to be segregated. So, King Abdullah wants to do certain things. He may not be able to do them for long, and the people who are coming after him may not have the same mindset.
If I may say one thing, in comparison with what the younger segment of society, not all of it, is learning about the world, these, shots of vitamin that we are, moving inch by inch, are perceived as should have been done in the 50s. So they're coming really late. They are moving forward, but moving forward historically extremely late. And with time, the more information is going to come to the youth element, to women. It's by the day now. I think the pressure is going to escalate, and the pressure by the Salafists or the conservative is going to escalate. This is only one spasm. I think ahead of us, we're going to see more than this spasm.
I was going to say on that point, an anecdote is that, and I want to put it perhaps to Wajia Al-Huwaider, an Air France pilot telling our Arabic language presenter that on a flight from Saudi Arabia to France, the men can't go to the bathroom because the women are all in there getting changed, getting made up, and there's a disconnect that everyone is aware of between the way you have to dress inside Saudi Arabia and that, basically Saudi women, they all go abroad nowadays.
Oh, you mean they take off their veil when they go abroad?
Take off their veil, put on makeup, etc.
Oh, yeah, it's because they are just like any women. They want to live, they want to enjoy life, so of course they'll do that. Most of them, they are forced to wear, they cover and to be in black. Who wants to be in black all his life? I feel sorry for them. Most of them, they don't choose. But you will never know who did really decides for them.
Is foreign travel undermining?
I just want to go back to an issue with the corruptions. Corruption in Saudi Arabia is huge, but the problem is also the absence of NGOs. We don't have NGOs. We don't have people who are really working on issues like the stealing the money of the country's wealth. Nobody is really watching after these government institutes. What are they doing inside? Where their assets goes? So the NGOs is an issue, and also for human rights, we don't have any NGOs. We have two, and they are government. And those who are working there, they used to work for the Interior Affairs. So how could you have any changes in Saudi Arabia if you don't have NGOs? And when you compare them to Jordan or to Morocco, we are totally different. These countries, they are way ahead of us in many aspects. One of them is that they have established good civil societies, and they've been demanding many rights for women and for their political prisoners, for women who are facing domestic violence, for children, for everybody, for voting. So for us, we are just at a stage where nobody is with us. We have to first establish civil societies in order to change many things in people's life in general.
Inside Saudi Arabia. And there obviously is change going on. Just one final point before we wrap up. We're going to show you images of women protesting, veiled women. These women are not in Saudi Arabia. They're in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Some of them with anti-Saudi posters. Stéphane Lacroix, what's your reaction to these images?
Well, these anti-Saudi posters, you mean? That's
the women who are protesting here.
Oh yes, that's common. That's what you see in Saudi Arabia as well. When I mentioned these protests in front of the Ministry of Interior, most of the people protesting are women. So women are active as much, and the social networks, and we've talked about this, also gives women the opportunity to participate as much as men. And in Yemen, because it's a bit less conservative, it is very conservative, but a bit less, women would go to the streets more easily than they do in Saudi Arabia.
Final point on this, Walid Fares. Saudi Arabia, with a heavy hand back in February, sending tanks into Bahrain, keeping a close eye, obviously, on what's going on in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, at the end of the day, is it going to retain the clout it's had, not just in the Arabian Peninsula, but in the Middle East as a whole?
That's what they're trying to do by crossing on that bridge into Bahrain. It's precisely to stop Bahrain, in their own mind, from falling into the Iranian sphere. And at the same time, they know that behind their back in northern Yemen, there is another uprising, the Houthis, supported by the Iranians. So outside the issue of discussing reform inside Saudi Arabia, and outside the discussing the issue of the future of Yemen, which is still under question mark, there's this whole Persian Gulf problem between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis are very adamant about it for the simple reason of geopolitics. The entire eastern border of Saudi Arabia, or most of these provinces, have a majority of Shia. And they are afraid, the Saudis are afraid that the Iranians will have increasing influence in those areas. So going to Bahrain is basically to protect Saudi from Iran.
So there's the inside problems and the problems more on a regional level. I want to thank you, Walid Fares. I want to thank Stéphane Lacroix. I want to thank both Wajia Al-Huadair for joining us from Dhahran in Saudi Arabia, and Naila Al-Faifi for joining us from Bahrain. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we'll talk about this issue soon again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. And stay with us, because coming up next, it'll be Time for Business. That's hosted by Marcus Carlson.
Afghanistan. After 10 years of fighting, the US Army is pulling out. 10,000 soldiers will be leaving before the end of the year. In Helmand province, an area that's seen some of the fiercest fighting, soldiers of the 3rd Marine Battalion are getting ready to go. They will be the first to withdraw. After 6 months of fighting, it's the end of a war they may never win. The question is, once they've gone, is it only a matter of time until the Taliban regain control? Reporters, Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Paris time on France 24.